Breaking news, some of the biggest tech companies have all announced hiring freezes, and some of them are even rescinding job offers and internships. These are the same tech companies that had double-digit growth during COVID. So in this video, we're going to break down why companies even have hiring freezes, what it potentially means for you if you are interviewing with them, and then answer some common FAQs. And if you find this video to be helpful, make sure you subscribe down below and share it with a friend if you know that they are going to have questions about these recent hiring freezes as well. All right, let's dive into the video. So first, let's talk about why a company would even need to freeze hiring to begin with. And there's basically three main reasons as to why that would happen. And the first one is potentially because that company is actually too far along and ahead of hiring for the year. Basically, they were only supposed to hire a certain number of people and they could have already hired them before the end of the year. So they've basically run out of headcount and now they need to stop hiring and wait until they get more headcount for the next year. Now, the second reason, which also could be related to the first, is that a company needs to pause hiring so that they can retain the current employees that they have. Because they could be worried that business performance may be going down and they may be overstaffed. So instead of continuing to hire and then having excess people and resources and then having to lay people off, they would rather just pause hiring altogether so they can actually keep the employees that they already have, which obviously is a good thing if you're one of the employees that works there, but maybe not such a good thing if you were interviewing and expecting to get a job offer. And lastly, of course, from a business perspective, a company would stop hiring if they are a little uncertain about the future of either their business or the economy altogether. Of course, hiring freezes and pauses are very common during economic recessions. And currently, there is a bit of news that there could be one right around the corner, and some companies are probably just going to be playing it safe and trying to manage their budget and resources. Now, keep in mind, all the reasons I listed are generally tied to why a company would do a hiring freeze, but there are different reasons as to why a company would actually be doing layoffs. So if you want a video breaking down that, why don't you drop a like so I'll actually know if that's something you guys are actually interested in, or you can just put it down in the comments below. Okay, so now that you know why a company may be freezing hiring, let's talk about what a hiring freeze actually means for you. Well, of course, if you're an employee of that company, like I mentioned before, this is probably a good sign that they're trying their best to retain as many employees as possible. Of course, if they are already doing layoffs, you should know that by now. So if you haven't been notified that your company is doing a reduction in force, then this is probably a good sign that your company is actually being very smart with their money and are doing their best to retain their people, which I think is actually a very good sign of a very good employer and a company that you would want to work at, especially when economic conditions are a little uncertain. Now, if you are someone who is interviewing and you find out that there is a hiring pause, like there are across a lot of these tech companies, what I would say this means for you is, number one, if you have a niche position or basically a niche type of role for a specific project that isn't really common amongst the rest of the company. So for example, if you are interviewing for a hardware position within a usually software heavy company, I would say there's probably a higher likelihood that you would actually get headcount back after the hiring freeze and they would continue to hire for your role. So niche positions and niche skill sets do tend to get filled even after hiring freezes. The reason is, if you have a niche skill set for that company, basically you have a rare skill set that doesn't already exist within the company. So they don't actually have other resources who they can ask to do the work if they were to stop hiring for this position. So they're gonna still need to prioritize hiring for your role because there isn't anyone else at that company who could, in theory, do the work that you can. Basically, if you think about the rules of supply and demand, in this particular situation, you would be in high demand with low supply for that company because they already have tons of other people with other skill sets that are duplicative. But you have a very new skill set that could be a critical part of a critical project that they need to keep running. Now, the second thing that you need to know about a hiring freeze is that generally the higher level positions will continue to get hired for after the hiring freeze is over. Usually companies will not want to use the budget to hire lower level or entry level people. Usually because it's not really a niche or prioritized skill set for them. Instead, if they have a limited budget for the remainder of the fiscal year, they're going to want to use that budget to hire senior level people, either at the manager level or above. The reason being is because they can get more bang for their buck. If they're hiring someone who is a technical lead, for example, that means they can do technical work and manage people. So they basically can wear two hats. And as opposed to that, they could hire probably 1.5 lower level engineers, which financially doesn't really make sense. You'd much rather spend the money on a resource or a person that has more utility and is much more flexible. All right, so now let's talk about some common FAQs or questions you may have if you were interviewing and you find out that there is a hiring pause. And the first question that's very common is, why isn't my recruiter giving me direct answers to all of my questions? Or, why is my recruiter giving me different information than what's available online and in the news? Well, quite simply, this is because recruiters are only allowed to communicate to you what the HR department and the comms department at their company tells them that they can communicate. So they're gonna really be reading from scripts most of the time, usually because they do not want to create mass panic out there in the market, right? A company doesn't want rumors going around that they're freezing hiring or that they're taking offers back or that they don't know how to manage their budget appropriately, because then people won't want to interview and work for their company anymore. So they're going to have very specific comms and things that they can actually tell candidates. And this could be a little bit frustrating for you because you may want to get a very direct answer, and recruiters, unfortunately, may not be able to give you that. So if you have competing offers or multiple different offers and you're waiting for a company to tell you when they're going to start hiring again, but they can't actually give you a solid date or deadline, you should just make a decision with the information that you currently have right now. But if most of these large tech companies have hiring pauses and freezes, I would assume most other companies are doing that as well. This actually brings me to the second FAQ, which is, why is one particular company not having a hiring freeze when every other company in my industry is having a hiring freeze? Well, to be honest, usually this is because that company has such high turnover that they always need to be hiring people. So they actually don't have an excess of headcount currently for them to actually need to stop hiring. So this could be a red flag that you may want to dig into as to why one company out of all of these companies in your industry, for some reason, is still hiring during an economic downturn. Another thing you may be wondering is, why is a company doing a hiring freeze and laying off people? Well, in this particular case, you would probably have to assume that that company unfortunately overhired given the amount of growth that they estimated they would be experiencing. And if their business is not doing that well, either due to the business itself or the general economy, they are going to have to scale back the existing resources that they have at their company. But let's say you were interviewing for a company and they announced a hiring freeze, but they haven't announced any layoffs. That is actually a very good sign and something you should take note of as a really good employer for the future. What this basically is telling you is that that company has done a great job with strategic planning for the business, and they've done a very good job managing their growth expectations and finances overall. Because of course, if you think about it, that's a great company you would want to be working at if anything were to happen to the economy or the business. You know that they have managed their resources well and they focus on retaining their people. Alright, so I hope you found this video to be helpful if you were curious about hiring freezes and what it potentially means for you. Now, if you have any other questions about this, can you put it down in the comments below, because I do read all the comments and I'll do my best to answer all of them to the best of my abilities. I know this may seem like uncertain times and you're not quite sure what's going to happen. So I'll be here to support you and the entire CareerShakers community. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.